You need a minute.
$10, he's not going to be able to hear me. Yeah, I know. Hey, John, this is Dave. Can you hear me? It's on.
John, can you hear us? 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, John, this is Dave.
Dave, I did hear you. It's garbled, but I can hear you.
All right, I may have to use text so I don't get like I get the big echo here because I'm using my phone.
Gotcha. Do you want me to call you or anything, Dave? Would that make it any easier?
No, it's fine.
Okay, very good. Okay, very good.
It's our wonderful sound system that we have in here.
We'll make do.
No, it's been a rough day.
Got a case of the moon days. We good? So President Keppel is unable to be here this evening, so you guys are stuck with me to chair this meeting. So I apologize in advance. Formatation. First order of business for the Committee of Whole, I'll go ahead and call it to order for March 30th, 2026. First order of business is the review and approval of the March 16th, 2026 Committee of the Whole. Without objection, they are approved. Great. The next item of business we have is the only item of business we have this evening, which is a communication from the Planning Department regarding the Madison-Hilliard intersection study that was completed by Iteris, and I believe we also have someone from Iteris available to answer our questions. I know, obviously there's a fatality at this intersection, and then it's, if you counted the Facebook and social media comments about this intersection, it probably eclipses every other intersection in the city. So interested in really, things that we can do that are grounded in sound engineering practices. So at this point, I'll throw it over. I don't know if it's it looks like it's Public Works and Planning, so I'll let you all lead.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councilman Bullock.
Before jumping in, I emailed the planning staff and Director Gordon this question beforehand, but the report refers to something that I wanted to just make sure we understood, which was the stop, the Madison Avenue. I infer there's a soon-to-happen Madison Avenue-wide schedule, traffic timing recalibration. Is that what that is? But maybe if you could just give us the sentence prior to jumping into this study of this one part of Madison, that would be great.
Yes, Councilman Bullock, thank you. So as part of the Hilliard-Madison intersection study, a complete separate project is the Madison Avenue stop study. So the Madison Avenue stop study is basically a signal timing optimization project. We have not implemented that yet on Madison because we're waiting on everything to do with the Hilliard-Madison intersection. So a brief, quick summary will be, yes, the Hilliard-Madison intersection will be included with the stop study, but anything in regards to that specific project has not been done yet because we are waiting for the next steps with Hilliard-Madison.
And Mr. Chair, quick follow-on. So are you saying the study that's going to be Madison Avenue-wide, the separate study that partly overlaps, has yet to be completed, or it has been completed, we have results, but we're not going to implement the results until we talk about what we're talking about tonight?
Has yet to be completed.
Okay. best guesstimate, would it normally, independent of this, would that normally be a 2026 or a 2027 thing, or what?
It would have been completed already.
Okay. Okay, so once that's rolling, that'll be multiple months?
Yeah, I mean, there's no set time for that right now. There's prior to us getting into the roots of the Madison-Hilliard intersection, there's a lot of things to consider, and the stop study is certainly one of them. I would say out of everything, that's probably something that's going to happen no matter what. But the entire process for the Madison-Hilliard intersection is going to take some time. I would say months on end, and that's going to include this study as well.
So, sorry for all the follow-up, but so the Madison Avenue full-length study, your thought is that's going to be on hold until we know what we're doing with Madison and Hilliard?
Yes, because you don't want to, what wording am I looking for? You don't want to commit to doing a traffic signal optimization study all the way down Madison, stop at Hilliard, Madison, don't do anything, start over again, and then do the rest of Madison all the way down to Riverside, to then go back and have to redo the study all over again to now include whatever it may be at the Hilliard-Madison intersection. So what it was decided upon by Iteris, Public Works and Engineering, all of us in general, all on the same page is, when we implement the recommendations at Hilliard-Madison, we will then include doing the stop study on Madison from 117th all the way down to Riverside as well.
Okay.
Because it's best to knock it all out at one time than to a la carte and piecemeal everything together.
Okay, that's helpful context. And once we're ready to rock and roll, that'll take, what, 18 months, 24 months?
I don't have an exact set time frame right now. There's a lot to consider. As you can see with the short-term recommendations, there's equipment that needs to get in. There's equipment that needs to get put up. There's upgrades that need to be performed. There's a lot of floating parts right now. And with lead times and things of that nature, I don't want to commit to a set time frame. Understanding the sensitivity of the intersection, all intersections are sensitive, I understand that. But we will certainly look to get this completed as soon as possible. I just don't want to commit to a set time frame right now.
Sure. It sounds like normally you'd gone for one season to do the study. Sometimes it might go into 2 seasons if things aren't perfect. I'm not talking about the Hilliard-Madison. I'm talking about the whole.
I would suspect we should be able to get everything completed before the end of the year.
Okay. All right. Thanks. All right, makes sense.
Now it's your turn, Dave, or Assistant Director Boss, I think.
I'm done. I'll see you guys.
It took Chris Gordon, or Director Gordon, 9 minutes to say probably by the end of the year. Thank you, Chris.
That was a great prequel.
I just appreciate the thoroughness of it.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of council. Appreciate the chance to come back. This will be the 4th presentation for this study since it was completed in November. We submitted it to council, I believe before the end of the year. We reviewed it with Planning Commission, and then we spent 2 meetings with the new case board reviewing this, and now we're here. And we do have Mr. John Albeck, formerly of Iteris. He's the traffic engineer that conducted the study on our behalf. And so I can follow up afterwards with kind of the results of Planning Commission and case. Basically, both organizations recommended that we implement the short-term recommendations. Both were supportive of the long-term recommendations. I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, just the language out of Planning Commission was that obviously they were interested in implementing the long-term recommendations as soon as possible, but knowing that, and we can talk through some of those, just the inherent complexities with some of those things like curb bump outs and things, especially the value of having, we had one of our new commission members as an RTA planner, and we spent about 30 minutes walking through the complexities of curb bump outs and how complex it can be given RTA's 25 route down there, the bike lanes, and all the other things that you have to consider. It's not just as easy as redesigning and redrawing the curb lines. There's an awful lot to be considered. And then the secondary implications that those long-term recommendations would have on traffic flow when you have a bus that's stopping in the primary and only through travel lane. And so there's, I say that as we consider short-term recommendations, to kind of jump quickly, just to put in your head that we are supportive of the short-term recommendations. I believe our approach now is to get those out as quickly as we possibly can, get those things rolled out, and then allow them to have an impact and an effect before we then look to jump to make additional changes in the intersection. Because a lot of the changes that we'll walk through tonight are signal changes. They're signal timing changes that are going to significantly change the level of service in this intersection. And that, when you talk about changing the level of service, complete streets and everything else that we have, this is a rebalancing of priorities, if you will, for all modes of transportation. And that happens across a lot of different ways to do that. And we'll talk, and you're well aware of some of the physical changes that we've made to the intersections to highlight pedestrian, bicycle travel, those types of things, and better physically delineate or highlight those modes of travel. But the signalized changes that are being made are kind of part and parcel to that. When you implement something like leading pedestrian interval, it has an impact on all the other signal of the phases of that intersection. And so what Mr. Albeck will walk you through is kind of the impacts of those as you consider those. And so it is not, I guess my point is that is not an insignificant thing to roll that out and allow it some time for people to kind of adjust and see how it works over time without jumping to the next thing or those long-term things too quickly before we've had a chance to kind of analyze and assess how the short-term recommendations have had their impact. And so I guess with that as just kind of a quick aside prologue, I will hand it over to Mr. Albeck, and he can walk you through kind of the summary of the study and answer any initial questions you have. And then if that's okay, Mr. Chair, we can go from there. So.
Sounds good.
All right. John, if you can hear me, if you want to just provide a quick overview or a summary of the study.
Absolutely, Dave. I didn't know, did you plan to share a screen or anything, Dave, or just would you like me to verbally go ahead and give an update? The study is up, and so I can go to whatever you want, or if you want me to share the screen so you can see it too, I can do that. Sure, that would be great. Thank you. And maybe we could just focus on figure 21, Dave. I think that might be the easiest way to just kind of summarize the changes that are proposed. Looks like it's coming up here. There we go. I can see it. And first of all, Dave's scrolling to those that page and everything. Really do appreciate the opportunity to work with the city. It's been a great study. It's been great working with the staff and everything. And I do think that we have some short-term types of improvements that can be done in a relatively quick time frame to really make some tangible benefits for the operation. As David mentioned, there's always a cost to this in terms of if we're going to improve safety here, we might be impacting the efficiency and some of the delays. Now, we've done studies, we've done modeling to show what those impacts are going to be, and I'll kind of touch on those as we go through here. So this is kind of our infographic that lays out the short and the long-term recommendations. I know David mentioned some of the long-term, and through some of our other meetings, we've got a couple other recommendations that could be looked at in the future and have kind of been added to the list of those things. But the short-term recommendations are truly things that can be implemented quite quickly to make some of these effective safety improvements. Because I heard before, yes, this is a highly visible location. Clearly from what you can even see on the screen there with the skewed angles and the 5 legs, there's a lot of challenges there. So the first item, if you're looking at the list in the lower left-hand corner, the short-term recommendations, this has the most dramatic impact. First, in terms of safety, which is what we all really want to achieve, but it's the one that's also going to create more of that delay for our vehicular traffic in these cases. So what item 1 is right now, as it is today, if you are making a left turn off of Madison, either onto Hilliard or even if you're I'll call it westbound left, to go on to Carabel, pedestrians, you at some point will get a green arrow and then a green circular indication. And during that green circular indication, pedestrians could be crossing in that crosswalk. You can already see from the length of the geometry, the size, the skew of this intersection, it can be very hard to judge the gaps in the traffic, where the pedestrians are, where the bicycles are. It can be very difficult for drivers to navigate that. And in fact, one of the accidents that occurred, not the fatality, but one of the accidents that occurred was a westbound left striking a pedestrian in that crosswalk on Carabel. So what this improvement's going to do is going to greatly improve the interaction of left-turning vehicles with bicycles and pedestrians. So what will the indication will change from that 5-section signal head to a 3-section signal head that will be a red arrow, yellow arrow, green arrow. So the only time a left turner can go is on a green arrow. When that green arrow is on from them, the pedestrian will be in a solid don't walk, and the opposing through will also be red. So they'll never have to look to yield to anyone. Dramatic improvements on the safety. They won't have to judge that and guide it. Now, what's the downside? The delay in the waiting time for that left turn will be more. Now, instead of being able to continue, on a lower volume time of day when there's not much traffic out there, you're not sitting there waiting for a green arrow. You're able to proceed, as it is today, you are able to proceed on that green circular indication. The downside, though, is, again, what I said before, you're having to judge gaps. This is really going to improve safety. Our levels of service and our delay and the stop program that was talked about earlier that's going to be implemented somewhat concurrently with this, we're redoing the timing with the other intersections nearby to help mitigate the delay increases that we'll experience there. So that's item 1. We will show some significant benefits for the safety of the multimodal forms of traveling out there. The second item is another signal timing change. So real quick, item 1 can be implemented quickly, relatively quickly. In-house staff, there's a cost associated with it. The staff to be out there will locate these indications, but a signal head can be put up. Other things need to be changed, move some of the other signals. Can be a relatively quick implementation. Item 2 is a signal timing change, which your current equipment can do. It doesn't require major equipment updates. What that is it's what's known as a leading pedestrian interval. So, as an example, pedestrians crossing from, I'm going to say, the northeast corner to the northwest corner, going from, I forgot what the office, I think it's an insurance agent's office over there, over to the park, if they're crossing like that. What will happen is prior to the westbound or the eastbound getting their green light for the vehicles, there'll be a pause. There'll be a 4 to 5 second delay, and the walk signal will come up for that westbound pedestrian first. Give them the opportunity to get into that crosswalk, control the crosswalk, be more visible for the right turning vehicles. In these leading pedestrian intervals, LPIs have shown dramatic, significant improvements in safety for pedestrians, giving them that head start. Now, the downside is, once again, we're holding up those vehicles for 4 or 5 seconds, and that, of course, will create a little bit of extra delay. Now, if a pedestrian doesn't push the button, the LPI doesn't activate every single time, so it's when the pedestrians are present, which, again, this is a pedestrian location like much of Lakewood. So they will be there, but we'll give them that leading pedestrian interval. That will be done for every single pedestrian crossing you see there. I gave an example of pedestrians crossing Hilliard going westbound. However, this will be for all of the crosswalks that you see there. A couple of the things the city's already done, but these are strategies that have been proven to show safety improvements. So I'll just kind of quickly hit them. Item 3, high visibility crosswalks. Those crosswalks that you see there today, those fit that need much more easy to see. Adding the green pavement markings to clearly designate that where the bicycle lanes, even on Hilliard in the northeast and southwest, if you will, directions, there's even delineation, those delineators that are out there to separate the bike lane from the vehicular traffic also. So that's item 4 there. Item 5, again, these are in place, the no turn on red signs. When you're a vehicle, you will not be allowed to turn on a red indication for a lot of the reasons. These skewed angles, lots of issues going on there. Through one of our other meetings, it came up, and we're going to, as we are implementing some of these strategies, we want to do some field spot locations again of, hey, maybe that sign could be relocated just a little bit just to make sure it's clear that that's for this direction. Now, the no turn on red is for all 5 directions, okay? That will, and those are in place. Item 6 is what you have at Detroit and Warren right now is an accessible pedestrian signal, APS, if you will. This is generally intended for the visually impaired. It'll have tactile, it'll have a button with the tactile arrow with a locator tone. The visually impaired then can use that to hear audible cues to say, okay to cross Madison Avenue. So they'll get those audible cues when the walk signal's on. Walk signal's on for Madison Avenue or to cross Madison Avenue. Don't walk. They'll get this kind of information. Even for the non-visually impaired, it helps with compliance because there is some kind of positive feedback to that pedestrian that, hey, I know my pedestrian, when I push that button, I know that it recognizes me. It's not just pushing this silver button that's out there and you don't know if it even has registered you. So APS helps with compliance also. And when I say compliance, I don't mean that in a derogatory, but because pedestrians will cross against the don't walks, this will help them, let them know, yes, I have been registered. I will get my walk indication. So that's an APS. It's a special kind of equipment, a special button. That will also be for all of the directions. So that will be implemented in the near term also. During the STOP program and even during this, item 7 there is updating all of the timing intervals to meet the most current standards. What do I mean by timing intervals? How long is the yellow interval for the vehicles? How long is a red clearance? Some may not be familiar with that term, red clearance. Forgive me for defining it. A red clearance is simply a portion of time when all directions have a red interval. No one is going. The intention there is if a vehicle has crossed into the intersection right when their signal turns red, we don't want any conflicting movements getting their green until that vehicle has cleared, or walk until they have cleared that intersection. So there is, at all these intersections, a red clearance interval, and we'll update these to the latest Ohio Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices standard. So that's the item there, and that will be done through the STOP program also. By the way, that item 7 will be done at all intersections along Madison through STOP. Okay, so just a quick side note. Signal coordination, I kind of mentioned this. This again goes back to the STOP program. So the adjacent intersections to this, what we don't want is this Madison and Hilliard running in isolation. What can then quickly happen, and what I mean by isolation, just doing its own thing. If we do that, then vehicles westbound might back up into the adjacent intersection there if it's not working in conjunction with that. and the other intersections around there. So we'll provide coordination, system operation, where we try to provide smoother flow for vehicles traveling. And that's the big intent of the STOP program, is to provide that smoother flow, have positive reinforcement to try to maintain 25 miles an hour. You know, we're timing it for 25 miles an hour. You go 50 miles an hour. Don't do that. But if they do, they're just rushing down to a red light sooner. You do 25 miles an hour, you should get a smoother ride through the system with fewer stops. So this signal coordination that will be implemented to enforce positive speed. Now, I say that, and I've watched drivers my whole career just drive and stop, drive and stop, drive and stop. But hopefully, maybe some education through these programs will help too. So that was item 8. And then item 9 is, because we've converted, item 1, back to 1, because we've converted the eastbound and the westbound left to that protected only left, we anticipate and we model that the length of the cars, I'm sorry, not the length of the cars, the lengths of the queues of the vehicles that are stacking up into those left turn lanes, we need a little bit more room. So what we don't want is for Orchard Grove to be turning left and having to turn left out of the queue. So that should be converted to a right out only, if you're exiting, a right out only type of operation. And those are the short-term recommendations. Dave, would you like me to hit on the long-term ones right now?
Yeah, you can go ahead. That's fine. Thank you.
Perfect. I don't want to get long-winded on you. I know it's late and all. The long-term, and again, there's been some other things here. Dave kind of mentioned this, the bulb outs. Item 10, if you're looking at the graphic there, that's to tighten up those curb radius, to slow down the vehicles to turn right, to give those pedestrians a shorter crossing distance, which really helps with a lot of things. If that was easy, it would be short-term. That has a high cost. There's utility coordination, there's water flow, there's so many things. It's a lot more than meets the eye. It can have some very positives, but that's something we don't want to not do the short-term things while we're waiting for this years-long project to do curb bulb outs. That takes time. It takes design. We would like to get these short-term ones, but keeping on our list, hey, as you're programming out your improvements, this is something that can be looked at, because now we're starting to get into the potentially millions of, I won't even give costs, but much more costly. Item 11. Now, your control equipment doesn't currently do this, but there are systems out there where you can have much more intelligent systems that, as an example, if a pedestrian was in the crosswalk while the don't walk was on, which I know we don't want them doing that, but they will do that. We could have some detection equipment that will sense the presence of, with radars and other detection systems, quote unquote, see that a pedestrian's in there. It's that detection equipment is communicating with your control equipment. It knows, hey, pedestrian's there, but their walk light is off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to illuminate a sign for the conflicting vehicles that say pedestrian and crosswalk. I'm also going to illuminate an LED light to really spotlight that crosswalk because there's a pedestrian there. Yes, I know they're not supposed to be, but they are. Let's give that driver that type of information. Pedestrian and crosswalk, illuminate the light. Could even take it another step. Again, this requires new equipment, detection, potentially even a new structure, because the way the structure is out there now with diagonally into the street, we'd have to look at even new structures, because we could be into the hundreds of thousands at some point. But as you're updating systems, it's something to consider moving forward with some technology. So some cool things that we can do there, but it does come with a cost. Item 12 is just something to keep on our list. I like the idea of item 1, which was the protected only. That would be the green, yellow, red arrows. If in the future it's discovered that that's a little bit too painful for the left turners during certain times of the day when the pedestrians aren't present, there is a signal indication out there being used throughout Ohio ODOT's kind of a fan of this, which is known as a flashing yellow arrow. And I won't go into great details on that right now, but it is a mode of operation where you could at times of the day run the left turns as what suggestion one is, protected only. They get a red arrow, yellow arrow, green arrow, that's it. But during other times of day, and or even when there's no pedestrians presence through detection, we could allow them to go with a flashing yellow arrow. Now, I do not want to see the first flashing yellow arrow in Lakewood go at this location. It would have to be tried at other locations prior to ever doing it at such a visible, high profile. But as it could potentially gets implemented at other locations, it is a strategy that, yes, it's good for safety and can help minimize a little bit of the impacts of the delay. And then the last one here would be auxiliary signals on the uprights. And right now, because of where the structures are, it's not a real good fit for this. But all that really means, everyone, sorry, I kind of glossed over that, is additional signal indications for the vehicles that are not on the overhead mast arms. These are actually on the vertical upright portion. So, for instance, if you're behind a truck, you might not see that signal indication that's up on the mast arm. You can, though, often see the one that's off to the right on that upright location that's on the side of the road. Because of the skewed angles and because of where the structures are, we would like to look at this in the future, but it's not as easy as just saying, hey, just go throw some up there today. But there are some benefits to doing that. So yeah, that's a high level summary of what we're looking to do. But I'll just reiterate, these short-term recommendations are things that can be implemented in a very relatively short time frame. Anything else, Dave?
Nope, I think, Mr. Chair, pending any questions, we can go into discussion. So.
Yes, and I do want to make sure we get around to Case and Planning Commission's comments as well. But thank you. This is really helpful, and I'm sure my colleagues will have questions as well. 3 or 4 come to mind for me. But by the way, thank you. I think, data and kind of a plan are a good place to start. And this intersection has always been challenging. The question I have is kind of the short-term versus long-term. Number 10, which is the kind of curb bulb outs, bump outs, whatever you want to call them. So I understand that, doing new curbs, running new sidewalks, cutting in, looking at stormwater drainage patterns, where stormwater catch basins are, those kinds of things are very complicated. What I am curious about is I know at the Detroit-Sloan Valley Parkway intersection, there was some paint and planters that kind of necked it down to start. I believe there was some of the casino funds, the county casino funds funded that project. And it kind of started with a non-huge investment. I think it was an investment of $100,000, $200,000 of paint and planters that kind of started the process of necking it down. And then you don't really have to mess with stormwater flows. They're removable if it doesn't work. Is that something that could work here in your experience?
So, very familiar with the intersection that you pointed out that had the treatments there. Yes, there can be some improvements to doing things like that. Unfortunately, I feel that the pedestrians still feel kind of vulnerable out in this area that's just a painted area. The painted requires a lot of maintenance, even if we put in temporary objects. Now, I'm not suggesting that it can't be tried. That comes with, it's certainly never as good as saying, I'm sure what everyone knows is obvious, if clearly do the full build out. There are some things that can be done, like you had mentioned at the previous location. I'll kind of defer to Chris and Dave for their experience on how they thought that the Detroit Avenue operation worked.
Yeah, I think there's This is Dave, John. I think there's obvious benefits to testing out those long-term recommendations, especially on bump outs with something temporary. My concern at this point is just the primary thing is the interaction of the bus transit lines, the stop, especially on the westbound line. That stop is right at the intersection of Hilliard and Madison. It's kind of an awkward location. And so I think even before temporary measures, that is something that we would definitely need to get worked out, is the interaction of transit and the bike lanes there. But no, I'm all for working through the temporary measures before you do anything permanently. I think it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, and even, I mean, planters or planter boxes could be removed during snowplow season when you want more room on the road for, that type of behavior. Dr. Gordon, looked like you were going to speak.
Yeah, I would also keep in mind that there's a lot of things that are considered here, and you got to look at turning radius as well. You got fire trucks, you got refuse trucks. Again, not that I'm all about safety, because I am, but there's a lot of things to consider specifically in this intersection. Perfect example, if you're driving eastbound on Hilliard and you want to go, or excuse me, on Madison, you want to make that turn on a Hilliard, that's going to be a tough turn for a large vehicle without going in oncoming traffic. And you could argue the same, potentially going westbound on Madison, looking to make the turn on a Hilliard. Again, not that paint or things of that nature aren't, you're able to drive over it and things like that. But I also have to take into consideration maintenance. What are we looking at with maintenance? How frequently would that need to be addressed? I understand planter boxes. Again, it goes back to who's maintaining these planter boxes, who's putting them out there, who's removing them, things of that nature. So again, not that I'm not against anything like that. My personal opinion, I just think for this intersection itself, and looking at the data, looking at the crash data, looking at a lot of things that are going on, I'd be anxious to see after the short-term recommendations how that goes. And then if there's additional steps to take at that point, if these issues are not corrected with that, taking those at that time. Again, that's solely my opinion.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like there's a little hesitation with the recommendation in general, less, because you're discussing, turn radiuses and such. I'm assuming that number 10 takes into account those things, if I'm mistaken.
I think number 10 coming from John was just an in general type thing. I mean, a lot of this would need to be surveyed. If you were to look into something permanent, you got to look at drainage. You would have to look into the bike lanes. You got to look into RTA. You got to look in other utilities that are there. As I said before, you would have to look into turn radius. There would be a lot of things that would need to be considered. I think this was just a general overview. John can correct me if I'm wrong, on potentially what could be done there. I will say that for the curb bump outs that we proposed on Northland, that took a lot of work. Not that we're not willing to do the work. Of course we are. That's what we do. But it took a lot of work. It took a lot of changes. It took a lot of looking into just for a curb bump out there. And that took multiple discussions with police, with fire, with refuse, with ice and snow, snowplows being able to make the turns and things of that nature, drainage. We had to add a catch basin. There's a lot to consider than what's on paper.
Yeah, and you guys got the experience from Northland. No, I'm just kidding.
We do,
yeah.
And that's why we're patiently waiting to see how that one goes.
Yeah, and
being the first in the city, and we wanted to see, okay, what did we learn from it? How did this go? What can we get better at with it? Is it working? Is it not working? Similar with the LPIs that are going in on Bunce Road and all of the elements that are going on Bunce Road. We want to see how all of those work, learn from them, see what was successful, which we suspect a lot of it will be. That's why we're doing it. And then looking at potentially implementing a lot of those complete street elements in other places.
Yes, and I think my comment on paint or planter boxes for number 10 is any of these corners, right? So let's take the southwest corner, for example. That one is the one where you're kind of on a little bit of an island, and that has to be the longest crosswalk in Lakewood, going from the south side of Madison to the north side of Madison there. And so, even just doing that one corner of the intersection, I think would help. So I would encourage us to be creative, and maybe, I know there's lots of grant opportunities where you come up, you can get 50 grand to do something. And so I would encourage us to look into that. Yes. And also, this is pedestrian behavior. It's about driver behavior too. I mean, the fact that someone can get 45 miles worth of speed in this intersection is a challenge. We should design it so they can't get that fast, right? The second thing I will ask, and this is more for the traffic engineer, do we consider hardening those rules at Carabel and Orchard Grove, meaning Carson markers, some sort of curb so that someone couldn't turn left out of either one? Signage is important. It drives behavior. Google Maps won't take you that way. Waze won't take you that way, but it doesn't stop someone who wants to turn left. Is that a common practice in traffic engineering to put Carson markers up or have a hardening so you can't turn left?
So I believe I caught most of the question, and I will apologize to everyone for sometimes the microphone sounds really good, and then there's other times it gets a little bit garbled. So if I misstate something or I don't answer your question fully, please don't hesitate to follow up. But the question on some of the things that can be done to try to prevent and keep vehicles coming off, I believe the question was about Carabel and the right turn only movement there. Yes, those types of things have been considered. One thing that was actually considered too was potentially making it a one-way southbound. There was not a big desire to do that through and or closing it off completely, but then looking at other routes and such. Now, all of that had been considered through a research of the study. The accidents didn't show that would provide that big of improvement, and because of the desire for the emergency vehicles to continue to use that was, I'm not going to use the word discounted, but was not considered. Are there things that could be done to preclude left turners from utilizing that? Absolutely. I'm going to lean on Chris a little bit again here too, just because each and every one of those then, and again, I love the thoughts, and don't get me wrong. I think there definitely are some things that can be done. There are maintenance sides of the house that come into that too. So, Chris, I might have missed part of the question. Sorry to lean on you a little bit. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, you can lean on me, John. Again, I mean, from a public works perspective, we have to go back to not only maintenance, but snow plowing, street sweeping, things of that nature. This is a conversation I've had with a lot of folks in regards to adding physical barriers to the road. And the indirect consequences that in certain situations, adding physical barriers to the road give to specifically my department. Not that we're against them, we're all in favor of safety. Again, I wanted to reiterate that point. But in certain situations, there are indirect consequences. So if you're going to add a physical barrier to the middle of the road there, that is going to implement ice and snow plow service. The trucks are a certain width wide. I have to look out for their safety as well when they're coming down the road. So if there's a physical barrier in the road, we need to take that into consideration. Again, not that wasn't considered here. Again, it goes back to emergency services as well. As John said, we did consider making Carabel one way in each direction, and emergency services was not in favor of that whatsoever. That was a main artery. I was told I am no fireman and I am no policeman, thank God. But again, Carabel was seen as a main artery to get back to that neighborhood. So any type of quote unquote physical barrier that was going to be put there to make it one way was not, I would say, agreed upon with emergency services.
Yeah, and I think there are ways to allow for emergency services access, but not general traffic. But I do think that what is proposed here is excellent and will make this intersection safer. The last question I have, because I've monopolized a lot of time and I apologize, is was there any consideration for the width of the road going from the southwest corner to the northwest corner on Madison is doubled with that crosswalk, I think, because it's diagonal for some reason. I think because it wants to mimic the sidewalk of Hilliard. Was there any discussion of just 90ing it, a better verb, basically making it straight across Madison? I understand that would require a different signal arm for the walk signal, but I just didn't know if that was ever studied or thought about.
Yes, it definitely was considered. There's no doubt of making it a 90. The issue starts to become, well, with this intersection, there's always lots of issues, as we're already discussing here, but making that more of a 90-degree intersection really pushes that crosswalk quite a ways back to the west. If you're going, I'll call it southwest on Hilliard, you're making that right turn. Now that crosswalk is that much further away from you. The pedestrian is not nearly as visible to you. So anything we can do to shorten that crosswalk, like what you recommend or suggested there, definitely was looked at. Just wasn't seen as an ideal situation to be pushing that crosswalk back that far, unfortunately. So we did not recommend that for this.
Thank you, and I'm sure my colleagues may have questions. Councilman Evans?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just first of all, thanks for all the hard work. I agree with Councilman Baker. I think these are very well thought out improvements. I'm really happy to see hopefully do all these short-term things in the truly short term. And certainly I'm looking forward to the curb bubbles and things like that after we see how this works and when it makes sense. But two questions. One, I've heard from some folks, and it's an interesting perspective, but was anything talked about with the speed limit differences on these two streets? Madison's 25, Hilliard's 35. So people talked about, I've heard some residents talk about it's just kind of an interesting dynamic coming together at such an intersection that's already problematic. And then my second question is, with the walk lights, I know there'll be LPIs, but, and this goes for citywide, as some people in this room know and hear from me a lot, will the walk lights automatically come on every time a pedestrian's allowed to cross, or will it be you have to use the indicator button each time? I'm of the opinion that this citywide, if you're able to walk, the walk signal should go on automatically. So just thoughts on those two things.
Absolutely. So let me touch on first the question number one was the speed differential. We clearly know that slower speeds are much safer. You know, there's lots of studies that will show 35 versus 25 has an impact on, safety. Did we specifically look at reducing the speed on Hilliard for this one? We did not, but I don't want to speak policy for the city folks here, but that wasn't something that was looked at for this particular intersection at this particular time. But certainly something that could be considered. Again, I don't want to set the policy on what it could be, other than, we'd want to go through a little bit more of a study on the speed limit changes and such. The second one, and why did I just draw a blank? Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. What was the second?
No worries. No worries. Ensuring that the pedestrian walk signals come on automatically anytime they're allowed to walk, and not just by pressing the button. Gotcha.
So in general, what will happen at an intersection like this and along Madison is, in general, what will happen is pedestrians crossing in the east and west direction, adjacent to or moving with the Madison Avenue traffic. What we'll do in those cases is we'll run those pedestrian walks to come up every single time, so they won't have to push the button. Here's the challenge. And if we bring up the walk indication to cross in the north-south direction every single time, when there are no pedestrians, what really drives the amount of time needed for the north-south direction is that pedestrian timing. So I'll give you an example. At any one of these intersections, if one vehicle pulls up late at night, early in the morning, whatever it is, and the walk comes up, we need to give them their full walk time, which could be 7, 10 seconds. No big deal there. But then they need to be provided certainly their full amount of flashing don't walk time and the buffer time that's necessary for the pedestrians based on those intervals. And at this intersection, we're talking an extra 28 plus seconds. So we're at 38 to 40 seconds of time, and that's prior to turning yellow. That would be, Hilliard would be in a green state for one vehicle for 40 seconds, and there's no pedestrians. And what we start to get is a lot of non-compliance with the vehicles also, and frustration. So we don't like to do that. We like to provide that time when the pedestrian pushes the button. Secondarily is whenever we have the walk indications come up each and every time, and by the way, there's great locations where we should be doing that. Smaller intersections in particular, in downtowns and some of those things. However, the problem then also becomes, because we bring up that walk and then flashing don't walk and then yellow and all red, what that does is it increases the overall amount of time to service every movement. That includes the opposing or the different walks on the different crossings. So now we get pedestrians waiting a lot longer for a pedestrian phase that's come up on a direction that doesn't have a pedestrian. So they start to get impatient and they're non-compliant also. So we've really started, it's term we use is the cycle length, the amount of time to cycle through all of the intervals. And if we bring up that walk each and every time, we do need to increase that cycle length. Third thing I'll mention about that is if we want to have any kind of, I'm going to use the term cooperation or system operation between this intersection and the intersections around it, what they need to do is they need to run with a compatible cycle. I know I use the word compatible, but generally you could think of as an equal cycle. How long does it need to run? So if we are going to drive this intersection to need a longer cycle, the ones around it often get driven to a longer cycle also, if we want to provide that system flow, which again has positive speed control and everything also. The easy answer is to cross in the north-south, they will push the button. I hope the APS provides better, not just, again, I hate to use the word compliance because I don't want to sound negative here. That's not what I mean. But that more positive reinforcement and feedback that, yes, I did get my indication. There is a better there. So the recommendation would not be to bring up the walk indication each and every time all around. Now, I'll add one quick thing. As technology advances and we get better things out here, there is passive detection technologies that would say, hey, the pedestrian doesn't push the button. I see a pedestrian here. During my next opportunity, I will bring up that walk. They didn't push the button, but I am passively seeing that pedestrian out there also. That kind of goes along with the item 11 that we talked about, is also doing those types of things.
Great, thanks. And one quick follow-up, and this is an observation, maybe item 13 speaks to this, but this intersection in particular, if you're a pedestrian, you can't see the traffic signals. So you have no idea where in the cycle you are. So if you're just walking up to that light and it says don't walk, you could wait there for like 2 whole cycles to be able to walk when you press the button. So maybe if those side-mounted ones can at least help you see what the traffic light is doing, because you literally cannot see from any corner what the traffic light doing. You have no idea. So thank you.
No, that's a great comment, and it's another value added to the auxiliary signal heads. Appreciate that comment. And as things change, because us as pedestrians, we like that we want to know what everyone else is seeing. Also, it's just makes us more comfortable with our condition there. So no, I love the comment. Thank you.
Councilperson Strubig.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Albeck, and thank you to the Planning Department and Public Works Department for working on this so we can make this intersection more safe for all of our residents here. I had a question, Mr. Albeck, and I'm hoping that you'll start the conversation, and then possibly planning can jump in afterwards, and possibly Public Works as well. But I wanted to talk about, Mr. Albeck, the comment you mentioned briefly about education and how we start to help our citizens realize that this intersection has changed. I know I've seen in some instances where they say, signal change, coming soon, or what have you. Have you seen anything else in other communities that they're doing? Can you talk about that?
Absolutely, absolutely. So one of the things, signing definitely is one of those things. You could see signs that changes are coming. Forgive me on what the actual verbiage is. We'd want to look into that. So there definitely is signage that can be presented. One of the signs that likely will be put up, even with these short-term implementations, will be, now this is more, I'll use the word reactive, when the changes are made, and I'll have to look up what the language is again, but it's phase changes have been made. I'm paraphrasing the language, but telling these drivers and these pedestrians, hey, changes have been made. So there is some education that can be done with signing. Certainly I know, and I'll use ODOT as an example, when there's changes that are made, they try to, pardon me, also have their videos and their informational brochures to kind of present to the citizens. Social media groups and such can get the word out about some of the changes that are coming. So there's all kinds of ways to provide that information. Signing has some success, but some of this is anecdotal. I don't necessarily have a study to show this, but in my past, when you ask someone, what did that sign just say? Often like, what sign? I'm not saying that they don't notice and it doesn't help, but there's limited benefit. So there's all kinds of things that can be pushed and promoted. I'd be curious, maybe Dave and Chris have some other ways that you've done. Well, the committee that Dave, you've got going on right now is an education thing too. Did you want to add anything?
I can, John. I would say that is kind of, as we start to look to the time frame of rolling these things out, that is kind of the next step, is an important thing. And it's even as simple as, trying to keep it short, concise, and simple, like one topic. It could be like a brochure or one-page, like one-screen thing on LPI, on reminders about no turn on red, like reminders about please don't walk when when it's not
right
the white guy walking across the street. Those things, it's just reinforcing as everyone here lives and drives and walks around the community. It's like those little things as we get into kind of the 100 days of summer of reinforcing just basic behaviors. The number of times that I'm at the Detroit and Andrews heading south or trying to make a turn, that people just walk against the red, because exactly what John's talking about, because it's a three-phase intersection. And so you get the Elmwood traffic, then you get the Andrews traffic, and people don't get it, and they just get tired of walking, and that's his denying compliance he's talking about, and so they just go. And then you end up with a whole family or three people in front of a whole line of traffic that gets the green, and it's a very limited green. And so that is a challenge that we need to answer up, and working, I think, with the mayor's office and the communications officer and things, just to come up with those short, concise topics that I think, just as I'm thinking through it, they're not necessarily specific to this intersection, a lot of them, but they just need to reinforce those basic behaviors. But they can be done in the guise of these things coming out too, but they apply more broadly. So but it's a great point taken, because we are, at least in my view, we are not great at that right now, and we need to get better.
Thank you. I agree. And I think, for those, it's easy to say, well, we have the videos online, and you walk around in the neighborhood, they don't even know that we have a website. You know what I mean? So maybe even door hangers to let people know. And, this is another area where we could start working with block captains to keep educating their neighbors and putting out door hangers and talking to people. And we've got a beautiful park there, and maybe we meet there on a sunny day and talk about, you know, what the changes are. But thank you. I appreciate that.
We're a little bit over, but this is important, so assuming Councilman Evans will give us a couple more minutes. Do you have Councilman Bullock? Yeah, Councilman Bixenstein?
Thank you very much, Mr. Albeck, for the presentation. I really appreciate, especially you laying out kind of the safety versus efficiency trade-offs, and thank you to our representatives from Public Works and Planning for helping to make this intersection safer. I have one comment and two quick questions. I do appreciate that this study analysis took place during last April, because that gave the opportunity to see both peak school hours and then also spring break, where you would have had more of a summer environment, whereas maybe there were less kids going, you know, of course, kids not going to school, but perhaps the Wager Park was more crowded. So I do appreciate that. However, I think, you know, as the study states, there are four schools within 1 mile of this intersection, including, of course, Harding Middle School being in very close proximity. So I think as we, you know, go through these and analyze, we need to do it through the lens that this looming redistricting is going to result in more vehicular traffic during our rush hours, as well as more kids having longer walking commutes to schools. So I just ask that we keep that in mind as we are going through this. My two quick questions, with regard to the Orchard Grove right in, right out, you know, certainly that makes sense from a safety standpoint, but I'm curious as to what we anticipate as far as indirect consequences from that. You know, for instance, will people end up pulling illegal U-turns if they want to go east on Madison, or will they know to go to Woodward and, you know, make a left and use a kind of a triangle to get back in the right direction, Hilliard back to Madison? And my second question is, from looking at the data, you know, of course, with our east-west commercial corridors, sun glare is a major factor, or at least it is when we're not in winter and haven't seen the sun for a few months. And I guess you know, when I look at the crash analysis and the timing, it doesn't seem to suggest that sun glare has been a major factor in most of the crash data we have. Can you confirm that that is indeed the case?
I will start with the second one first. Yes, we didn't see any, and I totally agree with you on these east-west roads that sun glare can be an issue at certain times of the day, certain times of the year, depending on some situations. But we did not see from the crash data that sun glare was any kind of, because we'll look at time of day, what's the year, kind of dig into the data in the reports, and none of the evidence was showing that sun glare was an issue creating some of the crashes. But no, great comment. The first question about the conversion of Orchard Grove, there certainly are always concerns about, again, noncompliance of vehicles and or, quite frankly, you know, the inconvenience that it's going to create for some of the vehicles that do then make the turn and then have to kind of rework themselves through the system a little bit different. Certainly is recognized. I don't know if this is the good news or the bad news, but that volume, the amount of traffic that comes out of there is relatively low. So we hope it doesn't impact people significantly. I suggest that as you hear of noncompliance, other things could be looked at and addressed to tighten that up. For instance, again, I don't want to hold up short-term recommendations for things that potentially may not be an issue. And again, I'm not against even doing them, but I really want to see, I would really like to see these things that we can do like within a month get implemented. But if there is some issues with vehicles continually trying to make that left turn out of there, another study could be looked at to do some more counts, gather that data, get that information, and then more physical types of barriers and such could be considered for that right out only. But as it is right now, it's a quite low volume, so we'd like to see how it operates with this relatively low cost type of signing and pavement marking.
So to add on what John was saying to you, Councilman Bixenstein, is the convert Orchard Grove to right in, right out that one is one that we're gonna, similar to what he's saying, we're gonna implement these changes. We want to see how these changes do, see how Orchard Grove continues to operate after these changes. If it becomes a problem, look to make it right in, right out, but see how these changes affect it off the start. I would say that would be probably last on our list because it has a very large impact on that entire neighborhood. So we want to make sure it is an issue. So similar to what John said, kind of see how this all plays out, see if traffic is backing up or, longer legs, making that turn onto Hilliard off Madison, see if it is an issue with folks coming out of there trying to make the left and things of that nature.
Thank you both, and I agree it's not worth holding up some of these short-term changes in the meantime.
Councilman Bullock, then Councilperson Hamilton Steiner.
So the intersection we're talking about is my neighborhood. I go through this intersection every day, and I come out through Orchard Grove. And so Councilman Bixenstein did a great job of anticipating two things that were already, in fact, I've already kind of emailed you guys because I know we're short on time here. My punchline is I support the short-term recommendations, including that change. However, I'm going to hear about it from my neighbors and my family. And I think the first step is going to be to do an illegal U-turn. And the alternative path is to go all the way to Woodward by Harding School, which is a long detour. Going north to Detroit, where Detroit is quite slow because downtown is already quite activated, there is a construction project for the West Line apartment building. We're very happy that's coming with 120-some apartments at both Rosewood and Orchard Grove. And so, John, Mr. Albrecht on the phone here, that Orchard Grove is the exit for 2 streets, not 1.
Right.
Now, I take the point of the safety improvement of the left turns through Hilliard and Madison, and I think that's the priority. And so the stacking issue that you've anticipated, I think, is exactly correct. So we'll have to do it. But I think, Mr. Gordon, I'm going to tell you right now, it's unrealistic to think that people are just going to happily do this. This is a little bit like saying there doesn't need to be a crossing light at Mars and Madison. It took us years to get the Hawk signal installed, and it took our utility company months more to get it turned on. I'm glad it finally is operable. So I guess the point is not to fail to make safely implementations, but let's also think through the ripple effects, which I think is the point of your study. Now I want to back up a quick step. First, I've emailed some questions because we don't have time to go through it all. But one of my questions is going to be on sun glare. Sun glare is an issue, especially during the go to school in the morning hour. So, Mr. Albrecht, I'd encourage you to double check the data. Also, there was a car that hit a bike trailer with 2 children in the bike trailer, and the driver cited sun glare as a factor. And on your slide on page 22, citing the frequency of crashes by hour, I don't see the 8 or 9 p.m., the 8 or 9 a.m. hour when that crash would have occurred because it's on the way to school. So I wonder if you're missing that very visible traffic incident, which was alarming to us all, and a sad thing. I'm sure nobody involved in that accident wanted that to happen. But I do think sun glare is an issue seasonally, and it's going to be, during the school year when the sun is low in the sky. So one of my questions was, did we analyze the idea of allowing left turns or requiring left turns on Westwood, which is on the slide to the far right in our view? It's not analyzed in this analysis, but you could have eastbound traffic that wants to turn from Madison eastbound onto Hilliard, instead proceed straight through the intersection, turn left on Westwood, queue at the light, that's a signalized double intersection, and then turn right on Hilliard. I don't honestly know if that's a great idea or a terrible idea, but that is an option, and that's a workaround that, you know, we have all the time in Lakewood. People make cut-throughs and find alternative routes.
Yeah.
But that would avoid the left turn. Maybe you'd do that during the sun glare season. I don't know. But the tone and tenor of what I really want to say is I'm glad you're doing this. Is the recommendation of the administration that City Council approve this without changes? You know, I think I can support the short term without changes, but on the long term, I'd like to see us get to them more quickly rather than later, because I think rather than avoid all mistakes, I think we should have some risk tolerance and have the approach of gaining the safety benefits as soon as possible, rather than try to wait. In 3 years from now, we haven't really gotten to much. The one that's a sweet spot would be the real-time analytic data. Maybe that gives you the best of both worlds, where you can do some short-term things, but put in the LiDAR and the thermal imaging cameras and the predictive modeling, and then that way you could get the volumes for the vehicles through smart switches not being as impacted, and you get this pedestrian safety improvements actualized.
Thank you. And Councilperson Hamilton Snyder, I will say that I think receive and file, recommend, whatever we can do as our formal action out of this committee. And I will say to your longer term point, Councilman Bullock, I think this is right for budget. So I think we talk about it when we budget.
We already have the case has
Yes.
some funds allocated.
Yes. So yeah, I think that's a good point. So Councilperson Hamilton Snyder. Okay. Well, then I think the question then becomes, you know, I think our actions are receive and file, but to the point of, I think it's incumbent on all of us to, you know, work with the administration to see that these and help them and make whatever resources are necessary to implement the short-term recommendations. It doesn't sound like many resources, but, you know, it sounds like, is the administration committed to the short-term recommendations?
Yes, we are committed to the short-term recommendations. Again, we will, as soon as this gets through here, we will begin working as quickly as possible on it. I would be lying if I didn't say we've already started to look into many of these, and necessary equipment that needs to be ordered. A lot of it has already been ordered. So we are trying to stay ahead of it. But again, you got some lead times on some things in here and supply chain and stuff like that. So unfortunately, in certain situations, with some of the items that are listed here, we're at the mercy of that. But as soon as we are able to get all of the necessary equipment in, we will look to make the changes as soon as possible.
Great, thank you. And then secondly, on the long-term recommendations, Councilman Bullock's point, we've appropriated some money for case recommendations. And then also I'd be interested in, you know, figuring out during the budget, working with the administration on how to maybe fund some of these things. This is an intersection that is not ward specific. Everyone in Lakewood interacts with this intersection largely. And so, you know, certainly willing to do what we can to help fund it. I did want to make sure we made time, and I will say the clerk's office did a great job of explaining Planning Commission's input to us via email. And I was not able to attend the case meeting, although I am your faithful case ex officio member. I had jury duty last week in Judge Lauren Moore's courtroom, and I was the jury foreman, so I was unable to attend the case meeting. Assistant Director Ross, can you give us a high level of what their analysis was?
The three notes that I walked away from the case meeting last week was that they concurred to move forward with the short-term recommendations. If and when we get to the right turn only, or the restriction on Orchard Grove, which I think Director Gordon described it. You know, the approach, and the recommended approach, and our approach to the short-term recommendations is largely they're intended to be kind of sequential. They build on each other from 1 through 9. Some of them obviously have already been done, but there are things that have to happen before other things have to happen. The convert Orchard Grove to right in, right out is the last thing. And I think to Director Gordon's point is that you want to get the majority of all the signal changes and everything in there, see how the actual stacking and the queuing for that left turn actually turns out before you make that final. And I think it's well taken that is probably one of the most impactful for local residents of anytime you put a restriction down there. And so I think that's what Director Gordon's point earlier was, that we made weight on that. And so I think Case's point, given that discussion last week, was that if and when you're going to do it, to make sure that there is some outreach and positive notification of residents, kind of how we do the other public works projects on a street or something. If there's a letter or something that actually goes out to every house, so they know this change is being contemplated and when it's going to go into effect. And I will say the long-term recommendations with Case, it is a topic and a discussion for another time. How that board fits into the existing processes and planning and programming is very unclear. And so they viewed them the long-term recommendations. They're supportive of them. They recognize the long-term time frame. But generally, anytime that those recommendations would actually be programmed and budgeted for, they would likely go back to Case for a review and input at that point in time in terms of the specifics of what's being proposed. And so we had the same discussions in terms of, what's being shown, and everybody largely gravitates towards the physical interaction and the interventions of the bump outs. Exact same discussions we had at Planning Commission in terms of how you design and deconflict transit with bike lanes and the actual and everything else. So the discussion kind of devolved into that, the same kind of, you kind of get wrapped around the axle, all of these things, and sometimes you need to rely on professionals to actually do the design of those things in interaction with RTA and with bike lane best practices. And so I would bring that back to Case when we actually have a time frame, the programming, the budgeting, and confirmation that we're going to move forward with those, whether temporary or permanent. And so those things need to be fleshed out a little bit more in terms of the inner workings of Public Works and the Director of Public Safety. So.
Thank you. Sounds like planning summer intern may be having a lawn chair at this intersection after we put some of these short-term recommendations in and doing little counts. So thank you. We've gone a little over. Appreciate. Councilperson Hamilton-Steiner.
Thank you, Chair Baker. Assistant Director Boss, is there any plan to communicate essentially a status update to the community regarding these short-term recommendations, and what are the next steps moving forward, since this is something that I think a lot of the community has been very worried about and concerned about? I think an update might be good to just disseminate some information out.
Yeah, I think that's fully within the intention of the mayor and once we makes the final decision on the kind of the when and the what. I think we're all coalescing around the short-term recommendations that we talked about, but again, I have to lean on Public Works in terms of the actual when that's going to happen.
So again, as I said before, we're going to look to get this done as soon as we can. I'm waiting on equipment to get here. We have to coordinate the exact stop project with John. There's a lot of floating factors that are going in right now. So I know I had said before the end of the year, and John saying, yeah, we can get it done, within a month as soon as we get everything. And yes, that is correct. But I have to have everything physically here. I have to obligate employees to doing this work, which we will. It is at the top of our list. But again, it goes back to making sure that I have everything to get the work completed. And on top of that, Dave and I have a laundry list of other intersections we're looking at as well. So there's a lot going on right now, if I were to be straight up. And this is at the top of our list. So I think it needs to be made clear in here that, we are focusing on this right now, especially as it gets through council. So some of the other requests that are coming in are going to need to be put on hold until we can get this completed.
don't fully understand that. Maybe we could talk about it offline. But to the point of this particular action, I appreciate everything the administration's done here. And to the point Councilperson Hamilton-Steiner made, I think the public's very interested in this, so I would encourage the administration to have some outreach about this study. I think it's good work, and I think we should applaud the administration, for doing it. And I certainly, so with that, I will make a motion to receive and file this report.
Second.
Motion made, second. Any discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So one comment on I think the point of some of my colleagues to the Public Works Director and the Planning Department is communication, public education is your friend. And so whatever physical or timing or smart circuitry we install, and eventually I hope curb bump outs also, it all works better and more effectively the more communications that we have. And we've got the potential for quite a lot of good content. In fact, I wanted to thank the police department, who's not here tonight. They put out a anti-glare advisory, including just simple things like clean your windscreen, clean your windshield, and I did it, and it helped. So, so we've got a lot of content and a lot of people. I think that City Hall's footing should be, when in doubt, let's communicate and over-communicate, and that probably can help. A process question, Mr. Chair. Why is our action receive and file? Maybe just a quick recap. I think the formal process here is the Planning Commission approves and the case board also approves or denies. And so what the status of that is what?
Yeah, so this is, I welcome, earlier I welcomed input on that point, and the way I view it is I actually think, it's not something this is a study of importance in the community, so it was reflected in a correspondence to council, something that would typically go to Planning Commission, and Planning Commission would either recommend or not recommend or have comments to it, similar to case. I think in this instance, our action is to receive and file. I suppose we could receive and file with approval or receive or file, but I'm not sure Robert's Rules of Order has those actions involved in them, but I would welcome any thoughts of yours as to how else we would handle it other than receive and file.
Well, just to clarify, so the Planning Commission has taken what action regarding this proposed plan? Do we recall?
I would defer to Assistant Director Voss. I believe they received and filed or recommended with some comments.
It was, I believe that the action from Planning Commission was to receive and file a report with the recommendation to implement the short-term recommendations and look at implementing long-term recommendations on a shorter time frame than normal long-term, so as soon as possible.
Great, okay, thank you. And then you just recapped what Case did. It sounds, as a matter of fact, it sounds like there's significant consensus between all three bodies, which is pretty remarkable. We all want to improve, and we want to try to get to it as quickly as is prudent and practical. So, thank you. Okay, that answers my question. I don't know if there is a receive and file with a recommendation, which probably isn't because it's just ending in this committee, but Councilman Bixenstein looks creative, and he might have
a. I think that we can keep it in committee and bring it up later if we want, and not receive and file it. But I think that's pedantic. I think that we should receive and file. But I'm one person on this committee, so.
I think receiving and filing is fine.
Okay. All right, so the motion is made on the table. Any discussion, further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. No further business coming for committee of the whole. We are adjourned.
Again, thank you, John. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Yeah, you too.
Have a great evening.
Yeah.
I'm going to log out.
All right, without further ado, given the time, we're going to roll right into March 30th, 2026 meeting of the Housing Planning and Development Committee. First order of business is approval of the minutes of the March 9th, 2026 meeting of the Housing Planning and Development Committee. I'll make a motion to approve. All those in favor? Aye. Motion carries. First order of business and only order of business today. Communication from Assistant Planning Director Boss regarding the zoning refresh standard update, development standards. So whenever you're ready, Assistant Director Boss can hit it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just pulling it up. So, all right, Mr. Chair, members of council. So this is these are the slides from our zoning policy advisory committee meeting number 4 that was held back in January, mid-January. As you all are aware, just in terms of a quick recap, so as we've been working through the zoning refresh effort, which is supported by House L. Levine as the primary consultant on that, it is a long-term project. I think everyone recognizes that. We have been working on it for a long time, but we are working towards finishing it up by the end of this year. And that was kind of the general intention. Going into this, we knew that it was an 18-plus month project. It's an awful lot of work. So this is the 4th meeting of this committee that includes both council members Baker and Keppel as kind of our 2 primary council advisors. There's 2 members of the Planning Commission, and then there's kind of a variety of stakeholders across both resident, developer, real estate, chamber of commerce. Like we get a smattering of a lot of different folks from different walks of life that are generally familiar with zoning, design review, the different kind of functions that zoning drives. And so because it is so process heavy in terms of the advisory committee, there has been, it's been a while, but there has been community engagement, involvement up front to kind of identify the issues and the recommendations that we move forward on. But now for this, we are well in the weeds and doing the work of actually drafting and revising the new chapters of code. And so this meeting and these 4 chapters that I'll advance here so you can see. So it's chapter 4, 5, and 6, and 7. So these are basically what the Architectural Board of Review, as well as the Planning Commission, a little bit kind of delve into in terms of, that's fun, your development standards. Not something that I will say right now is a strong point of our current code. The pieces of this are very smattered across a million different places and have been developed over the last 15 to 20 years through different commercial design guidelines, front porch guidelines, a portion of our local building code in 132508 that talks about parking lot design, and then like the individual lines of code that are in supplemental regulations, district regulations, and everything that talk about parking, screening, landscaping, like all these things, sign standards, another section under local building code. Pulling these all into the zoning chapter and putting and organizing them in a much more user-friendly, when I say user-friendly, it's not only businesses and developers, but also our own department of knowing where to find everything, and it's logically organized. This is probably one of the hardest efforts in this larger effort of this refresh effort. You know, looking at use requirements in commercial districts and stuff like that, like we have that chapter now, it's just revising that chapter, but this was pulling a million puzzle pieces from different rooms of your house and trying to put it into some form. And then those puzzle pieces often are the most difficult to nail down when you're talking about building design and design guidelines. It's hard to get 12 people to agree on the right approach, and because largely this drives what will basically be allowed by right in terms of building development and design versus what has to go to a board for review. That is one of the overarching kind of intentions of this effort, is clarifying and streamlining design, development, review processes that right now, pretty much everything, if you read the code on face value, would have to go to Architectural Board of Review to go through. It is a frustrating point for lots of residents, architects, and everything, that everything from a garage to the downtown development goes through the same process. And yet there are just not very objective standards in terms of what they're asked to meet versus, you know, the subjective review of 5 architects that are like, I don't like that, I like that. And then you go to the next guy and he's got 3 other things that he doesn't like or likes. And so it's very hard. We did work over the last 2 years to come up with new residential design guidelines. So there has been some work recently that's really informed a lot of these things and will continue to inform this process. So I'm going to try to, in the interest of time, I'm going to try to step through these things pretty quickly, kind of highlight the main points of each of them, and then we can get to some questions. This is where we are, 7 in terms of the broader refresh effort. Step 5, this is where we were with the ZPAC. Now I'm talking to you about 5. We are working right now concurrently step 6, and we'll hopefully come back and see you on that, like in the June timeframe. And then we will very quickly in July, before the projected recess of council, we will provide you an introduction into 7, and then work on 7 once you come back in kind of September, October, November, and hopefully get through, because that is going to be the review of all those other chapters. The intention is to do that, if we can, concurrently with Committee of the Whole and Planning Commission at the same time, so that everybody's kind of in the same room working through the same stuff. So general development standards, on this is kind of the junk drawer, if you will, of development stuff. So right now we have like a section and a chapter on fences. We have a chapter on landscaping and screening. So this kind of brings it all into one chapter of all of those kind of miscellaneous and broad development things. So you can see like fence, wall standards, screening, vision triangle standards, trying to get back to if someone is going to, if there is a vacant lot, which doesn't happen a whole lot, but if someone's going to scrape a lot, especially on a commercial street, how are we going to want them to design that so that we do it smartly with proper intersection triangles for visibility of pedestrians and vehicles and all those things that are pretty bad about a built-up city like Lakewood. Outdoor lighting, buffer and landscape standards. So fencing, some of you are aware we updated the fence code not too long ago. It's, from what I understand, it's working pretty well, but this is everything from defining what is a front yard, what is a side yard, what is a rear yard, and then looking at something that we don't have in our current fence code right now is general terms like opacity. How much how much visibility or visible light moves through a fence? So is it, and then where is that most appropriate? So taking a stab at something like this chart in front of you that defines, you know, the type of fencing or the opacity, really not getting into the design of the fence, but the opacity of how much light and visibility moves through a fence, and where do you want, you know, less visibility versus more visibility. And so you can kind of see on there, as you get towards like 50%, 20% at the top, 20% would be like the most visibility on this chart of opacity, 100% would be the least. And so in rear yards, in most districts, we really don't care about opacity. And most of the times you want the maximum amount of screening, like in the rear yard between uses. But like in the front yard of, for fencing that is allowed in the front yard of the residential areas, that's like 20% is like the lowest opacity or the most visibility. You would want that on front yards, some of the side streets, so that you may get some visibility through those fences as you're at corners and intersections. And so this was something that we will obviously revisit. They got comments back from the ZPAC because this was a relatively new kind of concept for us to define in our code, but it does help when it gets into like administering it, and you know, when you get to what's in the front yard, what's the side yard, what do all those things mean, and then if someone proposes a fence, does it meet the opacity requirements that support our broader goals? We talked with them about screening standards. There's another area that I believe you have to go to our sanitary code to get the screening requirements for dumpsters. So that is like chapter 17 in our current code. It's way buried in there, and it's something that you really got to pull forward on a development or something that a lot of folks miss. And so this was a general discussion in terms of what needs to be covered by the code in terms of screening requirements. All of these cases were informed by prior Planning Commission and ABR comments in cases where ABR had seen something or Planning Commission had seen something and said in the past, we would like you to include screening in that. And so these were just, again, a lot of these are kind of brain teasers for the ZPAC, for that committee to say, is this something worth putting into permanent code? And so I think what came out of this one is that most of them, yes, they want some form of screening to be defined in terms of that general development. Outdoor lighting was something, we have a current section. Again, it is buried in our local building standards. It's not a bad chapter. It's just, this is an update and a consolidation with all the other development standards of that, and using, from what I understand, to be more contemporary terms in terms of actually using like the Kelvin color temperature and those things to get the type of light that we want. And so this was a big debate. Kelvin color temperature tells you, is it like bright white or is it more yellow? Like, what color do we want for like parking lots and that type of stuff, so that it's not like the xenon headlights like blinding everybody in a parking lot that's next to a residential area, but maybe it's a softer color. It's things that we've never contemplated defining that, but now you have the ability to define that. And it's not just lumens and spillover, but it's actual color and other more context. Landscaping and buffer standards. This was a topic that actually surprised me. So looking at like larger commercial and multifamily buildings, is there a percentage that you would want the code to require them to have like planting beds and stuff in and around the building? The ZPAC actually pushed back on this and said that they didn't think it was necessary, especially with most of these buildings on where the focus, from their viewpoint, the focus would be like the Detroit and Madison streetscapes. A lot of times you don't have, or nor we have room for planting beds that you build in there. And so they didn't really want to make this a hard requirement that people had to make. They were satisfied kind of with the most approach of the major development approaches that you get, where this kind of comes about sometimes through the design process, where depending on the design of the building and how. And so you all may feel differently on this. It'll come back up for discussion, but I would just, that's one thing that I did note with the ZPAC, kind of push back on it. They didn't feel like they wanted to define that, or at least not define it to the minimums that were here, like for a requiring that a home, you know, in the RM1 or RM2, those multifamily or the commercial buildings there, have an 80% required planting along the facade. So that could be a lot, I guess, in terms of 80%. So that may be something that they revisit. The other buffer standards was actually defining different types or densities. And this is really, you're getting after a density of buffering and transition zones based on the usage, the zoning district. And so kind of from the top to bottom there, less dense versus more dense, and defining that. A lot of times your buffers are going to depend on the distance that you have to plan with, but it can also be however they define the density of the landscaping and the planning in relation to the usage around there. It's kind of like the same thing as opacity on fencing. Is it okay to have, you know, a less dense buffer? And it's just something that right now we just don't even have this level of context in terms of defining our code. Is it required? I'll put that out there, maybe not. Is it too much specificity? But sometimes this level does help, because right now, like the next, following up on the next one is, do you provide like, or you could provide kind of those top-down standards? Are there different options that we want people to conform with? This is something that has come up more often in terms of ABR and Planning Commission of an assumed kind of buffer design or transition from a commercial property to a streetscape. It's not always intuitive to a developer or designer to come in with, oh, well, you would want a fence, and then you would want this, and you would want this, and sometimes they have to like walk the dog through exactly what they want. Whereas if you present them different types of options, and it's just really elements that kind of goes with the densities from the previous slide versus kind of elements like fencing, then a density B before you hit the sidewalk. It provides ready options for someone to look at and say, well, I can do that, this is permitted. And so, again, if I meet that, I don't have to go through review, or that piece doesn't have to be delved into.
Quick interjection.
Sorry, go ahead.
Maybe Mr. Boss just hit on something. So in some ways, we're writing the code or the improved standards in the planning code for the applicant, property owner, developer who needs the support. Because there will be, you know, I guess that's a fair point. I kind of assume that the experts who roll in know what they're doing, and maybe that's true for the larger projects, but we also want to support new developers, new property owners, the lay person who's doing a project.
I think that's exactly, because like the Castos of the world, they have landscape architects that come in and they do those plans, but the third generation property owner of a parking lot on Madison who just wants to get it done, or I just want a parking lot, but right now our code does require like 5-foot buffer or something like that. And that's what it tells them, is you must have a 5-foot landscaped buffer. And then you leave it at that. And it's like, okay, well, a little bit more guidance in the code of different options that developer or that property owner might be able to select from to meet that requirement based on the different uses around them. It just points them in the right direction of where we want them to go, rather than just saying, come up with a design and come to ABR and prove why it's the best. And then he gets that person who's not necessarily set up for success of going before a board of 5 architects feels like he gets his knees shot out from under him by being like, well, I'm sorry, I'm not a landscape architect. I don't really know what I'm doing. And so having these types of things, if we can define it at the appropriate level, you don't want to be too detailed, but I think will help people rather than cause a burden.
So it's kind of like we're going to try to achieve higher quality by addressing the middle and the trailing edge of the bell curve. And the industry best practice folks will always kind of bring their own knowledge.
But even then, it'll give them an appropriate level of guidance. Rather than assuming what we want, they will be able to read kind of generally the box that we want them to design within. Getting into parking lot a little bit, landscape and buffer designs as it relates to parking lots. This doesn't happen a whole lot here, but it is a matter of discussion with certain folks that have been on Planning Commission since I've been involved with Planning Commission, as it does come up. And so when you start talking about like end caps and median standards, and this is within larger parking lots where this stuff comes up. So rather than leaving it to the subjectivity of a certain expert on Planning Commission or a designer or something like that, of having the standards that when a parking lot is a certain size, certain number of spaces or certain acreage or size and square footage, which I know in Lakewood is hard sometimes. Once you pass different thresholds, you should look to incorporate end caps at this size, a median strip at this size, so that it may take up parking, and there's a balance between like the required parking, but the end state that we get out of it are common things that we have asked people to do, rather than just having a large square of asphalt, of actually having the green infrastructure and some of those other things that are incorporated. And so when you get to that size of parking lot that we would want those things to be incorporated, you build them into the code so people are pointed in that direction. But this largely will not happen a whole lot, just based on the size of development that happens in Lakewood. And so that's kind of the general standards that just kind of touches on a lot of those, the disparate pieces of code that are kind of spread throughout. Building design standards, this is probably one of the hardest chapters to get right. And so these are your design guidelines. And so there will be general provisions. And so basically these are, as you work your way through, and again, the slides, this is a very broad summary, but so these would be for multi-unit, mixed unit, and non-residential or large, like commercial buildings. So there's two basic steps that we would ask kind of developers to look at in terms of that, and this is for materials. So you would define the different tiers of materials that we would like to see in basically your commercial buildings in Lakewood. We have this right now, with our commercial design guidelines they're 16 years old. But those things say what we don't want to see in Lakewood is that there's discouraged or prohibited exterior materials. So this is leveraging some of the expertise, some of the architects that are on or ZPAC and that have served on APR for a long time of trying to, and this is an incomplete list, and this list was hammered pretty hard in the ZPAC meeting. But to try to nail that in there to say that you do have prohibited materials, but then what are kind of the premier or the tier 1 materials that we want to see when they're able, and realizing that it's primary, highest quality, highest cost. So then what are the tier 2 materials that are secondary that are, that are also acceptable? And then are there tier 3 materials that are also acceptable, probably because of their lowest cost? And then you'll see how these are then applied. The second step in that, reading that process, is you kind of tell them what materials are defined, what materials are allowed, which ones aren't. And then this is also new, and it takes a little bit, and we're still working this out. But then, based on the district, what percentage of the facade of that building can use those different tiers of materials? So the challenge is balancing this with kind of our current approach to architectural board review is that we like to hammer home like four-sided design, those types of things, so you don't end up with like a building that has brick on the front that faces Detroit and then vinyl siding on the sides. So this was the subject of an awful lot of discussion in terms of that like four-sided design. But this is a national kind of regional best practice that other communities use to help developers kind of get in the box of having the right types of materials, across the board. And this is where you can balance these things by having, banding in a way that our buildings with the storefront level and upper floors can have different materials, and there's lots of ways that you can kind of attack this. But basically, as you work your way from kind of what we viewed as what I would call the premier kind of district or building type for this, which is your multifamily buildings, down through like C1, C2, C3, all the way to what would be like the most flexible as industrial or municipal at the bottom. You can see how kind of the sliding scale of tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3. Again, this is not so that like lower cost, lower quality materials are more acceptable for industrial uses than they would be for like multifamily that you would see on the far the other end of that spectrum. This is by far not a final product, but I guess the intent of a lot of these things is just to show you kind of the different types of tools that Halcyon Levine is pulling from regional and national best practices and trying to expose them here in Lakewood and say, you don't have anything like this right now. Would you like to go down the road with this? Because it is a way that other communities and municipalities use to provide this design guidance to developers and even homeowners that are doing renovations to their house, because it's a hard thing to get people in the box on. You get into glazing.
Quick pause.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Baker.
Yeah.
Going back to that slide, and I'm sure this will be interwoven, and we did have a lot of conversation with the architects on like the primitive materials and those things. And I am curious if this overlays with like the affordable housing issue, and like maybe if you're serving an affordable housing kind of bucket, you get certain like kind of dispensations from certain standards. And so I would just ask that we think about that and try to be creative with it, because the tier 1 material costs the most, right? And it is aesthetically pleasing, but although that is somewhat in the eye of the beholder, but then that drives up, per square foot cost to build the building, which drives up rents.
That's a great point, Councilman. Is actually one of the things that we were talking about today is as I'm working through the next step, the definitions of all these in the processes. House Hill Levine had a definition that I'm sure we will debate into perpetuity for affordable housing. So without getting into the details of like debating the definition of that, my question back to them was that by defining affordable housing in your zoning code, you would assume that it is then used somewhere in that code as, in terms of, which is not typically within zoning, like in terms of, so to your point, that is a way that you could use that definition in terms of building design and then lowering this, not lowering the standards, but lowering the allowable or the higher cost things to try to incentivize that. And so that's a point well taken.
Councilperson Hamilton-Steiner.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to ask this question, only because it does piggyback off what Councilman Baker had said, and just wondering and just questioning, you stated earlier that the goal, one of the goals is to, clarify the design, development, review processes, and along the line what Councilman Baker was talking about with affordable housing is, my question is this also an opportunity to look at the zoning codes and thinking about how we can address some of our community issues, such as housing affordability, and also, economic development, as you said, we're sort of spaced out, but also keeping Lakewood a livable and accessible community. So I'm hoping that those things are being thoughtfully considered as, the codes are, as everything's being looked at and examined, and hoping that everyone in the room, and of course Councilman Baker's, part of this. I'm hoping that that's the mindset and that we're connecting it and keeping it connected back to our vision of our community.
I think just to address that quickly, and I know we have another thing with affordable housing, I think, next month that we'll talk through. But in terms of, quickly, in terms of zoning, that there's, the two things, of my knowledge, of to address that point of trying to, and this is, the first one is not going to be easy. And with affordable housing is you want to address the supply. And the way you do that through zoning is allowing more dwelling units on the same land that you have. That is something that this code, going back to the residential and creating the new standards of the RS districts, like allowing more of the 3 and 4 family units. I think when we talked, that might have been 2 times ago or whatever when we covered that. But that is something that we are actively trying to find a way to allow more density in the existing thing. And that, I think that is going to be could be, I'm just kind of looking forward, that might be a hard hurdle to get over that may produce some community reaction. For a variety of reasons, and you're all well aware of those. The second thing is the process itself of trying to streamline the process, and the process costs is another thing usually for the larger developments of trying to get them through so that you get those the more housing units that are out there, because the longer a process takes, the higher the cost of the project. So that by defining these development standards better, we're hoping, and the process, with the next time we meet in June, we'll talk about processes and trying to streamline like the plan development process and things to get developers appropriately reviewed, but through quicker. So that, because time is money for them, that all translates to those two things, I think, are the two of the main things that we can do to address that through zoning. So just,
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Real fast. Can you tell me Dave, what RM2, MD, and M is? Is that, I'm trying to, are you? New standards.
It's, one's the multifamily, RM is the multifamily, I believe, and then the MD is the municipal district, is a new district that we're creating for like schools, city buildings, those types of things.
Okay, so that currently is C4, commercial public school, I think.
Just for schools right now is, yeah, C4.
And I'm going to go quickly to City Hall on this map, is also C4. Anyway, okay, so that's what M is. And then RM2 is going to incorporate what is currently, no, wait a minute. MD would be mixed-use overlay becomes MD. Is that the idea? And then RM2 incorporates residential multifamily, high density and low density, something like that.
Yeah, there's the multifamily is this new defined multifamily. That a mixed-use overlay is something separate from the district that rides with the underlying districts, but there's still going to be a mixed-use overlay, I think, in the final form of the chapter.
Well, so I mean, I like where you're going with all of this. I just, you know, of course, the answer to the question, do we like this or not, depends on what it applies to. And I think I follow the logic. It probably does make sense, but it would be great also to make sure we understand how the current zoning districts are being crosswalked into whatever we anticipate in the new.
I think that's the important part. When we get to the final review, we will walk the dog back through all those chapters again, because there was a slide that might have been the first time that I came through, that like when we talked through zoning districts. And it has been a long time since we reviewed that. But.
Yeah, you and I were in the weeds on this very issue about a year ago.
Okay. So, but we're gonna revisit everything again. I know, as painful as it sounds.
No, it's good work, and you guys are doing very important stuff, because it sounds like we're finding gaps, we're adding quality, we're adding clarity, so that quality can actually be attained in the real world. I think that's the general theme, and then we're trying to make it a little more consistent and rational after you've inherited 100 years of miscellany, right? So anyway, thanks, Mr. Chair.
Let's just keep going as quickly. So we looked at like even glazing, like the amount of glazing on the side of a building. And so the different percentages. Now these were, again, they threw out, do you want to have a minimum percentage of glazing? And the ZPAC kind of pushed back on that. They felt like even these amounts, the example amounts, was way too much for a Lakewood building.
How about opaque spandrel glass?
Something like, yeah. And so that's something that they're going to revisit, kind of look at I'm going to even say the vernacular of Lakewood buildings and commercial districts in terms of the percentage of glazing, and maybe revisit this table. But this, again, helps a developer looking at larger projects and stuff of, you know, it can't just be a blank brick wall. Like there's got to be that creative application to that, but also potentially having a maximum amount of glazing so that someone doesn't come in with a building that's totally out of character for the area that's all glass. Talked about different types of entryways and kind of different elements on the fronts of buildings. And these are things that you can get into more illustrative and pictures that tell 1,000 words, and kind of dimensions in relation to the right-of-way, and different types of designs, different types of facade articulation. This comes up a lot in ABR. Again, you may not be surprised that the architects that walk in with what someone considered to be a very bland design, and the discussion just goes around and around the boy on how to break that up with bands and stuff like that. And so providing them pictures and examples and guidance helps kind of get them into the box of what we're looking for in Lakewood. And again, these pictures were not designed for Lakewood, so I don't want to, but they were just examples from other codes. And that's like so now we're getting into kind of restarting back again. So if we looked at, so those were all like the main commercial buildings and multifamily. So,
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, real fast. Dave, have you gotten as far as how many faux windows versus actual windows that you can see through and see product?
No, we haven't gotten into
That's
that.
a future thing?
That could be discussed in that glazing in terms of.
Okay. That is, I believe, incented under our current design guidelines, but I don't know if it's required. I know that, for example, the CVS at Arthur in Detroit did a nice job with that, and there are other earlier drugstores that use the windows to be they have big pictures up, not always maintained, to be the stock area or the cash register area,
There can be. That's an example of, yeah, the use of glazing to make it more appropriate for the character of the neighborhood, but may not necessarily functionally fit in with the layout that they want to design, but it keeps it that way. See, the Chase Bank was another one, albeit not very popular, of having almost a false second floor in that building. That's how you can make it look like it does fit in with the other storefronts on Detroit.
Well, so it sounds like we're trying to hit the middle point between flexibility and not enough detail.
Mm-hmm.
We're coming from relatively more flexibility and less detail. But the proposal here is to provide detail but options. And what does the ABR and the Planning Commission do? They have some discretion. So if there's a drugstore that really wants to have spandrel glass and not use the windows for actual windows that activate the walking street frontage, would the end point of this have enough ammunition for our boards and commissions to actually require or strongly incent? Because I would lean towards the quality myself.
I think the intent of this section and these chapters is to provide a stronger, more defined baseline for that discussion to then happen, rather than just leaving it up to the developer to assess the character of the neighborhood and come up with a design and then throw it in front of ABR with no guidelines, and ABR has nothing but their own personal experience to base their criteria and their comments after, which can be frustrating.
Thank you.
So this is all just getting into different, very similar topics like cladding materials and tiers of materials for, smaller residential, townhomes. You have to address townhome development. It's something that we don't have right now in terms of how you approach townhome development, in terms of units per cluster, the internal layouts, the requirements for layouts, those types of things. Residential porches is a huge thing here. We're going to make that part of the code rather than a flyer of guidelines. And this is probably one of the biggest areas where we can make guidelines in the code that allow people to repair, renovate, or replace their front porches without having to go through ABR. But just by following the guidelines, it becomes an administrative review process. This is kind of one of the big highlighted pilots that we want to make this an admin approval. That's part of the code. Parking and access standards. This is basically your parking lot design from local building code pulled into zoning, and it goes through all of the things that you would in terms of how you design a parking lot. And the elements that are there from internal access drives, different, these are some of the changes in terms of who approves curb cuts, of making that more upfront in the code. You don't have to dig to find it. Setbacks from property lines of access and alleys. Where parking lots are allowed, this is a huge thing right now. It is not easy in our code to find the prohibition on parking in a front yard, and so you always got to dig and find it, especially for people with residential homes that want to put a parking lot or a parking space in their front yard. Clear, informative tables to say where parking is allowed based on the zoning district. And then you get into the parking requirements. And so this is something right now and we can delve into this deeper into the future. They came in with a whole bunch of recommendations that were based on regional and national best practices. And I went through them in detail, and I basically told them to replace them with our current code. The national and best practices are so automobile-centric and driven that it would make it untenable for someone to build anything in Lakewood. The minimum parking requirements were so high. And I just feel that our current code right now, and we obviously can debate and discuss this when we get into actual the final review. I feel like our current code generally gets it about right 95% of the time, and the other times is that those requirements for exceptions to the mins and maxes that allow when you don't meet this or you want more, you want less, then it kicks it to Planning Commission review, which usually there is a favorable outcome. for that. Larger developments, the flexibility of going to, if it's more appropriate to a space per bedroom or whatever the requirement is, but to require that as a baseline is, I felt was a little adverse towards streamlining development. And so this is something that we did discuss a little bit. I pushed back on it, and we left them kind of as is right now. There were a couple areas that I would just say that we do need to define better. Right now, our code lumps a lot of uses under what's called public assembly, and that is hard for theaters and things often to meet this like 1 space per 80 square feet requirement. The public assembly, a church has a hell of a time meeting that requirement. That is something that they are helping us better define some of those public assembly uses and breaking them out as their own true defined use. And so that is one thing that we are updating. Bike parking, contemporary standards for bike parking, important. And then sign standards. Much of this is kind of our existing chapter 1328 local building code for signs and bringing it into the contemporary in terms of sign types and designs. And so there's an awful lot in our sign code, but again, bringing this into the zoning chapter rather than
Mr.
local
Chair.
building chapter.
Councilperson Strubig.
Thank you. Can you go back, I'm sorry, a couple slides here to the garage requirement for yes, thank you, that's the one. The 1 space required in a garage. Is that still applicable in our city?
So that will be a great topic of discussion.
Yes, I think so.
Because I have heard from both sides is in terms of recommended to drop it, and I've heard from almost an equal number of people to keep it. And so I can continue to push Jose Levine to give us more kind of clarification. I think the general national trend is that it's removed. But I get almost an equal amount of people to say that, for a city like Lakewood, you want to, I don't know if it's property value driven. I don't know if it's the notion that if you have a garage that people are going to park in it, which I know generally doesn't happen. And so that is going to be a key debate going forward in terms of if we keep that or not.
Thank you.
Yeah, Councilperson Baker.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, the Lakewood Alive, so from Cleveland Bridge Builders, which is a program through Leadership Center in Cleveland, has a group of mid-career professionals looking into kind of like Lakewood's requirement that you have to rebuild a garage, particularly as it relates to seniors and some of the struggles that they have to do that. And they interviewed Councilman Evans and I, and we were on the spectrum, where I would say that I think there's a lot of room in the middle on this argument to create kind of a sliding scale. It's not like, yes, you need it no matter what, and no, you don't need it. And so I think like there's a lot of wiggle room in the middle that I think we'll get to, and because I think there are good arguments on both sides. And it's I think an easy way is to say you don't have to do it, and an easy way to say you have to do it. But there's a lot of float there.
Yeah, thank you. And I have seen, in my own experience, neighbors that have never had a garage, rental properties that have never had a garage. So then do you go back and say, hey, you got to put a garage up? I don't think you do. And also, I see neighbors keeping garages up that definitely should come down. And I'm not quite sure what they're harboring in some of these garages that definitely should be coming down. So I'll be very interested in that conversation. Thank you.
Trying to think if there's anything of note with signs. There's not a whole lot of, major shifts in terms of our sign code. I think just outside of the incorporation of some of the newer things that our sign code doesn't talk about, one of them being like the big banners that are on fences.
Excuse me, Professor Bosco.
Yeah, the question I have, and we didn't get into this in ZPAC, but they did say that the commercial speech, Supreme Court, a lot of rules about what a city can regulate as it relates to, so content neutral, all those things. I really want to get this right, so I would push House of Levine, and particularly as it relates to some of our commercial storefronts. Sign pollution that some of these stores have is overwhelming. I don't know how many like super bright marijuana leaves I can stare at certain places, and that's not a content specific issue. It's more so just uniformity. So I'm sure we'll get into that.
I think that is one area that we need to, our sign code right now does not really discuss in great detail or regulate well like brightness, glare. You have to, I think there's like one line in like the sign design that talks about glare and traffic visibility, but you definitely could get as in the weeds as we wanted to in terms of the lumens and other things of how much they project out there. And at the end of the day, that also goes into the enforcement side, which I hope we are getting better at with our zoning inspector and things about window coverage and things like that. But so well taken. But that's, Mr. Chair, I think that's outside of next steps. Like I mentioned, we have the next ZPAC meeting that we're going to be reviewing the subdivision standards, zoning procedures, and definitions is going to happen in May. It's the 19th of May is that meeting. So my intention is to hopefully get a quick turn, get on the docket for June at some point to kind of go through the points from the ZPAC meeting there. And then hopefully I will be back on the docket before the recess, probably end of July, to walk through kind of our plan for the review of the final zoning ordinances. And that's intended to be kind of a rehash of these steps of going through and really kind of starting at district and use standards, development, building and sign standards, zoning procedures and definitions. Hopefully have about a month to a month and a half with each step of working through those. So because it is, we just want to get it right. And it's, and even for us, the value of that final review is immense because we've been moving through this at a steady clip and a steady pace, and it's impossible to get everything, kind of your arms around everything. And so it's very valuable that we're going to go through this. And like I mentioned, our intention is to try to do that between Committee of the Whole and Planning Commission at the same time, so that it's not we're not doing the two-step process with Planning Commission and then coming back to you all, but you all can have the opportunity to discuss it collectively at each step and work through it. So that everyone is hopefully in a much better place come November to move forward with this. So,
thanks for walking us through this. I'm very encouraged by this work, as I've said before, and thanks for. I know it's been a long and detailed process. I wasn't even on council when this started, so that's how long this has been going on. As an ABR alum, I. Certainly appreciate that, taking those steps to make sure that we can eliminate some of that kind of just back and forth by making some simple rules that, I mean, that'll be very efficient for everybody, especially folks who are coming in here before that body who, a lot of them are not used to it at all. I really like the prohibited building materials. I'd love to see that in the signage section as well, like LED strip light. I mean, there's any number of things we could do on that, because simply how many arguments have we had with contractors, and you can't use EFS. Well, why not? Because we said so. I mean, no, it's actually prohibited in the code. So that's like a really quick way to start knocking things off the table. So I appreciate that. I know I have a gazillion questions about this that are detailed. I'm not going to get into it here. I encourage my fellow council members to go through this in detail and do the same and follow up with planning. But if there are any larger questions, comments, Councilman Bullock.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I do appreciate this to the Planning Department. Thanks for continually reporting back. You know, we have a couple of us on the committee or on the council that are in the planning and legal profession and do property and real estate and design. A lot of us don't, so I find it helpful. One or two comments back to the sign thing and then a process comment. So on the signs, there's both the new who are using casino-level cartoon-like vivid colors and very bright lighting, and then having no screening at all on their front windows, so that their whole store interior essentially is functioning as a sign, and it's typically vape stores that I'm thinking of. So in effect, that because there's no screening or requirement, the interior is activated as a billboard. And that seems excessive. And then on the flip side, you've got legacy stores, beverage stores often, who are using the back of a vinyl sign to screen the fact that they've got a shelf of stock, whether that's, you know, snacks or alcohol, and they're above the storefront, excuse me, what's the term? The maximum amount of signage in windows that are allowed. Now that definitely will have an impact on those interior operations of those businesses, but they're supposed to figure that out. And I do think it's good if we're spending more time on the enforcement side. But the fundamental point, the reason I'm bringing it up here, is that the rules for the frontage that is approved by the ABR has a ripple effect on all these issues that I'm talking about. And then, of course, it's in the hands of the building department to chase. You know, but I do think, I mean, I have gotten, those are not hypotheticals, those are real constituent complaints, and I've done some follow-up over the years and probably should be doing more of it on that. Now, on the process, I doubt it's going to be realistic or desirable to do 7 council members edit and amend in whenever the final version of this is, final draft is coming through, and then much less with ABR and Planning Commission here too. So, and I also don't claim to want to go through every issue with a fine-tooth comb. Other council members might, but I might be more like Councilwoman Strebig, who's got several key points that have come up in our experience in the neighborhoods. Garages, for sure, one of them, and there could be some others. So, you know, how do we work through that? I mean, ideally, probably we identify and get those somehow into the hands of the ZPAC, so that the ZPAC's expertise can give us a chance at being successful at those things.
Okay, just to make this efficient, as chair of this committee, if people want to get me their individual thoughts and ideas where they have concerns or they really want to concentrate, I can compile those and share them with planning.
Okay.
That way we're not all hitting them from all different directions. So I'm happy to do that.
Okay, thanks.
Councilman Bixenstein.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to echo Councilperson Hamilton Steiner and Council Vice President Baker in appreciating that affordable housing is a consideration through this process. So thank you both for bringing that up. I'm going to ask a question that perhaps is common knowledge to everybody else, but it's not to me, so I'm going to ask with regards to signage. You know, sometimes I've noticed that temporary signage on our commercial buildings lingers, sometimes becomes permanent signage. And I was just curious insofar as how much, what rules are in place and what's considered with this particular update as far as limits to how long a temporary signage can be in place.
So again, that's another area, Councilman, that needs clarification and more, just putting it more in bold. Temporary sign, our current code has like one line that talks about temporary signage. Other than that, just through practice and experience, you're basically referred to the building department to get a temporary sign permit, and it's on them for the, this tells you how it's in the code. I can't even remember how long each temporary sign permit lasts. Is it like 90 days? Is it 180 days? And you're supposed to go get another one. I do know they were $15. And there's nothing in the code that applies any standards to temporary signage. So through practice and experience, we've basically come to the point of just saying that, well, you have to meet the same standards for your district for a permanent sign, for temporary signage. But it's a point well taken. It is trying to define where and when temporary signage is appropriate for use, duration, the approval process. A lot of times our code does not prescribe an approval process for temporary signage. And so you do end up with kind of everything under the sun. And then, again, an area that we are actively working at getting better at, enforcement around temporary signage was sporadic at best up through about the last 6 months ago. And so, because it sits in that uncomfortable space between planning and building, property maintenance and zoning. And so it's like the ugly thing that nobody wants to touch. So among many things, ugly things.
Thank you. I appreciate that consideration. And, I think sometimes I'm probably overthinking it, but psychologically, sometimes until a storefront has a more permanent sign, I have to wonder if their intention is to be permanent. And I'm sure, again, I'm overthinking it, but I always appreciate when there's permanent signage on our storefronts.
Whatever.
There's nothing more permanent than the temporary. Any other comments? Sorry if I've rushed everybody. It's my wife's birthday today, so I'm trying to spend a few minutes before. Yes. All right. If there's no more business before the committee, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you to the planning department. I really appreciate the update. Looking forward to what's coming next.